Today we are doing the design or teleological argument. This one is for Harris. Harris has asked for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work through the three versions and I'm going to try to weave the critique in where it seems most appropriate. So you might end up with something vaguely like an essay plan. Quite dense, there's quite a lot of it. So I'll try to whiz through it as quick as possible. You need to know the three versions. You need to know the version from Analogy by Hume. You need to know the version of Spatial Order by Paley. And you need to know the version from Temporal Order by Swinburne. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with Hume and the argument from Analogy. He's the only one that you can call an argument from Analogy, not Paley. Even though arguably Paley's is an analogy, for the purposes of your specification, it's not. So an analogy is a comparison between two different things, well, two things with similarities. And for Hume, he's comparing the universe to a machine. Now, this appears in Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion, and it's actually, he's got these three characters, Cleanthes, Philo and Demea, discussing religion. So he actually presents this version via Cleanthes, but he doesn't agree with the design argument. And as you can see, he comes in the specification for loads of critique. However, he presents this gorgeous version first, which is really, really nice. And he says, look around the world and every part of it. You can see it's nothing but one giant machine subdivided into smaller machines. And all the parts fit together and they're all perfectly adjusted with means to an end. And he said, if you think about the mind of man, look at the works that man has produced, these kind of beautiful designs. If you look at the universe, it is infinitely better and more beautiful. So the mind of God, the designer of the universe, is going to be like the mind of man, only better, proportioned to the grandeur, to the beauty of the work that has been executed. So you've got a couple of things going on here. You've got the analogy, the comparison between the two similar things, nature and machines, the parts fit together to serve a purpose, etc. Then you've also got the idea of like causes, like effects. So if the effect here is a particular machine, the cause is a designing mind. If the effect is nature, those similarities, if the effects are similar, the causes are going to be similar. So the mind of God, as designer of the universe, is going to be like the mind of man, but proportioned. And that proportionality is going to be quite important. So if you were, for example, to find a beautiful masterpiece, then you'd say, well, if I look at that and compare it to a stick figure in Crayola crayons, I'm going to say something about the mind of the designer of that painting, proportioned to the grandeur of that work. So I'm going to look at the evidence and I'm going to make assumptions or make inferences about the mind that has designed that based on that evidence. Now, Hume goes on to criticise this. One of the things he says is that it's a poor analogy. So we're making this comparison between the universe and machines. Why not compare the universe to something that's just grown organically? Some kind of giant pumpkin or something. So he's actually saying there's not as many similarities between the universe and machines as you would think. It's also a problem because you're inferring from a single case. So a good inductive argument, where you gather up evidence to generalise to a conclusion which is probable or highly probable but not certain, the better the inductive argument is, the more evidence that you've got. So for example, if I was to say, okay, well that's a machine that's been designed, and that's a machine that's been designed, and that's a machine that's been designed, and that's a machine that's been designed, here's something that looks just like it, it has probably been designed, that's fine. But what we're doing here is we're arguing from a single case. You've only got one universe, and you will only ever have one universe. So this problem of arguing from a single case makes it a poor inductive argument. So I can't say, well, that universe is designed, and that universe is designed, and that universe is designed, and our universe is just like it, so that's probably designed as well. I can't do that. So it's a really poor inductive argument. And Hume always bears, no doubt about it, he does not like the design argument. When we get to Paley, Paley was writing, he wrote a book called Natural Theology in 1802. He's the one that's the most famous, and again, it's sometimes called an analogy, but you're not going to. And he talks about walking along a heath, and he says, if I was to find a stone, I wouldn't be particularly surprised. I would just say, oh, the stone just happens to be here. I don't look for an explanation, I don't look for a designer of that stone, it could have just occurred naturally. If he then carries on further and he finds a watch, so he's talking like 1802, like pocket watches. I tried to find a visual for this, and I couldn't find a pocket watch, I've just got a clock. Yes, I've just got that clock. And he says, when I see that watch, I know that that hasn't happened naturally. Because what you've got here is you've got an order, a complexity, and a purposeful arrangement. So you've got these parts, and they have been arranged for a particular purpose. Now those features tell me that this has not occurred naturally. So you've got all the, I mean, imagine it was a pocket watch and there was this gorgeous, intricate cogs inside. You know that that's the result of a designing mind. And that's because that's the big difference between rock and watch. So if you then look at parts of nature, he uses the example of the human eye, that bears more resemblance to the watch than it does the rock, because it too has order, purposeful arrangement and complexity. So all these parts of the eye, they fit together beautifully and they're arranged just perfectly to serve a purpose of seeing. So, I mean, this is a time in 1802 where not only watch is really exciting, but we're learning loads about the human body and how that worked as well. So it kind of, natural theology was his book, but it was also a branch of theology which was using the natural world to show that God existed. Now, that avoids the idea of it being a poor analogy, because what Paley's doing is he's not saying that the watch is necessarily like the eye, or the eye is not necessarily like the watch. He's saying there's certain features of that. There's certain features of that eye, certain features of that watch that imply that it's designed. It also gets over another problem that Hume presents, that we have no experience of the universe ever being designed. So we might have experience of watches being designed, which makes us then say when we see a watch, okay, that's designed, but we don't have experience of the universe as being designed. Now, Paley says that's not a problem. If you were to find a watch and you've never ever seen it being designed, the very features of that watch itself tell you that it has a designer. You don't have to experience loads of them. It's not about experiencing how they've come about, it's about the features that are intricate and intrinsic to that watch itself. So, I mean, I've lifted the Michael Lacewing version here because you can put this in premises for Paley. Number one, anything that has parts organised to serve a purpose is designed. Number two, nature contains things which have parts that are organised to serve a purpose. Conclusion one, therefore nature contains things that are designed. Premise three, design can only be explained in terms of a designer. Premise four, a designer must have a mind and be distinct from that which is designed. Conclusion number two, therefore nature is designed by a mind that is distinct from nature. Conclusion three, therefore such a mind, God exists. So what's important here is the designer must be intelligent and distinct from the design itself. So what we have here is a God who is distinct from the universe. Now, another problem that is presented, Hume presents it, but Paley also acknowledges it, is spatial disorder. So, for example, we've got lots of lovely things in the universe that show order, complexity, purposeful arrangement, but we also have natural disasters, and we also have cancerous cells. So not everything is orderly, we've got a spatial disorder. Now, Paley actually addresses that. He said if you had a watch and for some reason it was running slow, you wouldn't just look at that watch with all its beautiful cogs and mechanisms, it's running 10 minutes slow, you're like, oh, it's not designed then. You'd still say it was designed. So certain things do go wrong with the universe, your tornadoes, your cancerous cells, etc. That doesn't mean the universe is not designed. I mean, there's all sorts of ways to explain that further than Paley did. I mean, it might be that we've not looked after that watch properly, but that would be another matter. So that kind of links in with the problem of evil there as well. Hume also talks about the Epicurean hypothesis, which is where you have infinite time and limited matter. Now, if you've got infinite time and limited matter, all possibilities of combinations of matter will occur. Now, it just so happens, for example, that we're in one that looks designed. Well, of course it looks designed. If it wasn't designed, we wouldn't be here. So if I think about it like this, if you were in a room and you had a bag of marbles, and you're just chucking those marbles on the floor, then you gather them up, and you chuck the marbles on the floor, and you gather them up, and you chuck the marbles on the floor, and you gather them up. Imagine you did that for infinite amount of time. At some point, those marbles are going to fall into a beautiful pattern. Now, if somebody walks through the door at that particular moment, they're going to say, oh, you put those together. Well, I didn't. It was pure chance. But if you have pure chance for an infinite amount of time and a limited amount of matter, you will get all combinations. It just so happens that, eventually it's the one that means something to you. This combination of matter means something to us because it allowed us to survive and to live. It's like if you were watching a lottery. If you're watching a lottery on a Saturday night and balls number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 came out in that order, you would shout fix. But actually that's no more or less likely than any other combination. It's just that means something to us. So when we look at it, we presume that there's been an intelligent agent behind it that meant it to happen. But that might not be the case. It isn't the case, it's just pure chance. The other issue you've got with Paley and his spatial order is evolution. So Darwin came along and just blew all of this out of the water. People dropped out of church, thousands, because he gave you an alternative explanation for the order we see in nature. So it's not a biology exam, you don't have to go into loads of detail. But what you have with evolution by natural selection is you start with a random mutation of genes. So think about that, random and mutation, something goes wrong. Mostly that's really, it has significant disadvantages, but occasionally that trait that has, might be a bit taller, a bit faster, a bit more beautiful, it allows you to reproduce more successfully, and that trait will get passed on. So it's really as the survival of the fittest, the weak die out, the strong and the more reproductively successful obviously pass on their genes, but it's brutal and it's random, but it's an explanation for what we see in nature. So that's why the eye looks the way it is. God didn't sit down there and plan it. It's evolved through random mutation and evolution through natural selection. So spatial disorder has its issues. Now, here's a nice time to bring in Swinburne, because Swinburne agrees that evolution explains spatial order. He agrees that the argument from design from spatial order is not strong. What it doesn't do is explain temporal order. Now, by temporal order, we mean the laws of nature. So that's just going to focus, is that going back? There we go. So, for example, things follow each other in absolute regular succession. So, for example, if I was to just illustrate this, looking at which piece of paper I can screw up. So gravity operates, and gravity operates, and gravity operates, and laws of motion. So if I was to throw this at the wall, you'd always have the same laws of motion and impact. Now, that never ever falters. These laws of nature. Now, the universe could have been very chaotic. It could have been that one day I drop it and it falls, one day I drop it and it floats into the air. The universe is not chaotic. And for Swinburne, that requires an explanation. He is still doing guest lectures. I've seen him. He's so cool. I've shaken his hand. So, what he says is that requires an explanation, because you can't use science to explain the laws of nature, because the fact that there is a science presupposes that there are laws of nature. So, these regularities need an explanation. It can't be science. The other explanation, the best hypothesis, is an intelligent mind, again distinct from the design. An intelligent agent who wanted this to come about. So, with Swinburne, it's got this idea that we cannot prove God, but it's the best hypothesis for the fact that we have these regular, unalterable laws of nature that you can't have any theory of evolution unless you've got temporal order. So, spatial order is weak, but temporal order is strong, according to Swinburne. So think essay plans here. If you're going to go from Paley into Swinburne solves some of those issues that Paley faced. There's also no problem of temporal disorder. So whereas you've got spatial disorder as an issue, you don't have temporal disorder, because there's no days where gravity doesn't operate or the laws of nature don't operate. So it solves that problem as well. The other thing that Swinburne's really useful for is addressing another issue with the design argument, which is the design of God. So again, Hume talks about this idea of proportionality, and he also says that wise man proportions his belief to the evidence. So even if it worked, even if you said that the evidence of design or order in nature was an argument for the existence of God, is it God as we would know him? Because all you get is a designer. Hume pointed out you do not get a creator. Sometimes creation and design are separate things. You don't know if God is mortal. Maybe he designed the universe and then he cleared off and died. How do we know he's perfect? In fact, the evidence in nature suggests he's not. How do we know there are not multiple gods? How do we know that he loves us? So, this idea that we can't really make much inference. With my students, I use the example of finding a cake. So let's say you stumble into a room and you find a cake. And this cake looks gorgeous, and it's really nicely iced, and it tastes delicious. What can you say about how that was designed? Well, you can say somebody or some people were intelligent enough to put those ingredients together. And that's it. They didn't create the ingredients, they didn't lay the eggs or grind the flour. You don't know why it was made. That could be a cake for a birthday, for a wedding, you don't know why. Obviously, you don't know how many people made it. You don't know if they're good at anything else. You don't know if they love the person they made the cake for. So there's very little thing, or very few things that you can actually say just based on proportioning your belief to the evidence. Now, Swinburne does address some of this. He applies Occam's razor. So let's not multiply entities beyond necessity. And if you could explain what we perceive around us with one God who created and designed, then that would be the best explanation according to Occam's razor. He also rejects the idea that God could have designed the universe and then disappeared, because although that would be fine for spatial order, it's not okay for temporal order. The fact that these laws of nature operate over and over again with absolute regularity suggests the presence of the designer now. So something's happening now to keep that in motion. Swinburne explains it as like a choir. So if you imagine that there were lots and lots of people all singing in perfect unity, then that suggests that there's some conductor who's bringing that all together. Now, that also requires a continual presence of the conductor. So if that conductor was to go, then they will keep singing in unity. So it's the idea of God holding that temporal order together at the moment, which is really important. So, and he also says, why would you put limits on God? If he's intelligent and powerful enough to do this, why would you put any limits on him at all? So in many ways, Swinburne can solve the problems of spatial disorder and all the problems that Paley faced, because evolution is dealt with, spatial disorder is dealt with, some of the things that Hume said about the limits of what we can say about God, all dealt with. Interestingly as well, Swinburne also addresses the idea of multiverses, because some people have suggested that there are multiple universes. Some had laws of nature that worked, some didn't, some allowed life, some didn't. And Swinburne says that, well, actually there's no evidence of this at all. And again, applying Occam's razor, why would you multiply entities beyond necessity? Like literally multiply universes. So if you're using that Occam's razor approach, that just wouldn't work. So Swinburne's very much taking the approach of science. If I've got a theory that doesn't multiply entities, that's what I should do, and I should go for the best hypothesis in the absence of truth. He says there's no evidence of multiverses at all. Arguably though, there's no evidence against multiverse, and if you wanted to kind of flip this on Swinburne, the problem of evil might well be evidence against God, but put that aside for now. So, what you have then, just to summarise, is you have Hume with his argument from analogy. Really gorgeous, look around the world, machines, some divided into smaller machines. You've got Paley and his argument from spatial order, and you've got Swinburne and his argument from temporal order. Along the way, you've got the problem with the analogy, you've got arguing from a unique case, and you've got, is the designer God? And then you've got lots and lots of Hume critique, including that Epicurean hypothesis, which you can throw in if you want to, about infinite time and finite matter. My preferred essay plan would be to reject Paley and accept temporal. But there's lots of ways that you can just reject all of them as well. So I hope that's okay, and I'll whisk through that really quick, but I understand that sort of 17-18 minutes is a long time to listen. Religious language coming up soon, so thank you for listening, and I hope that's helped.